You're listening to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Two fans, two generations, all things Star Wars begins now.
All right, well, hello, everybody. I'm Eric Vansel.
And I'm Daryl Sanders.
And we're your hosts for the show. And, of course, we're back. We're kind of in the middle of switching some things up. And, you know, of course, that's why, unfortunately, we couldn't be on yesterday. Yeah, lots of interesting stuff happening to us right now, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Been, quite the interesting and busy weeks. So
Yeah, it's quite an adventure. But, of course, we're here to talk Star Wars with you guys. And this time, we're going to be going into something that's, I guess it was hinted at. Wow, we got everybody here. We got Ted, we got Dragonfly, we got Voyager, we got David, we got
the gang's
everybody.
here.
Though, yeah, the gang's all here.
Squad up.
Yeah, well, you know, we were a little late coming on. That's why we have to apologize, too, that our schedule's been a little wonky as of late, but you guys are somewhat used to that by now. But yeah. So what we're going to talk about tonight is basically based on the last scene of The Acolyte, where we saw Yoda. And we're talking about Yoda's role in a possible season 2. Now, I'd say possible, even though I think I think it's a done deal. I mean, I don't know. Have you heard anything any confirmation about season 2 at all, or?
Yeah, more or less. It's definitely a go. It's just, and we'll kind of get into it. But basically, Leslye Headland said, she didn't want a whole scene with Yoda. She wasn't ready for that at the time, but she definitely wanted to show him as a tease for coming for season 2.
Yeah. And I think that that's a good idea, that they did save him to season 2, because I remember there was all kinds of talk about whether he would get, he's going to be in it in the first place. And I did point out he's present during the High Republic, and he actually had somewhat of a prominent role. But the thing is, in the comics and in the novels anyway, he actually took like some sort of a weird sabbatical. Like he just decided to go and isolate himself and teach and not really involve himself into a lot of the day-to-day operations, but just really commune with the Force, maybe take on some students or whatever. And I'm wondering, because this is coming up at the end of the High Republic era, where we're not too far away from the Phantom Menace, it makes me wonder if this is going to be where he re-engages and that they're going to depict that or not.
Yeah, I mean, well, Leslye Headland has all of much said in her one of her interviews, because they, of course, asked her about Yoda, and she's always said like, yeah, Yoda was definitely a part of the plan because Plagueis was always a part of the script. Right. She always knew that she wanted to bring Plagueis in, and she's like, well, if I'm going to bring someone in that's powerful as Plagueis, I need someone on the other side to kind of balance that out, to tip the scale. You need, someone who's formidable to Plagueis. So it stands to reason and makes all the sense in the world why you would bring Yoda back.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. I think that his role should probably still be somewhat subdued. I don't know if I necessarily want to see him front and center in a starring role. I mean, I don't know how good of an idea that is, because, again, there's a couple of things that you have to look at, right? When you bring Yoda in super prominently, there's a couple of things that are going to happen. Number one, obviously, to me, that just reeks of desperation to me. That means that, and again, I mean, I have to preface that, though, by saying that it is totally appropriate. I mean, he's around, he's a prominent character in the High Republic. It's not like the Palpatine thing.
Sense.
Yeah, exactly. From a story perspective, thank you. From a story perspective, it does make sense. But
yeah,
the problem that I have is that there are just a plethora of Jedi that you can bring in. I mean, when you look at all the Jedi in the High Republic, it's insane. I mean, there's books that are written where you have like completely different sets of characters. I mean, it's crazy. And
Well,
Yoda, like
yeah,
I
you had
said,
over
well, how many was
10,000,
it?
right? Like 10 over 10,000 or something
Well,
like
I
that.
mean, so the Jedi in their prime, yeah, but I mean, I'm talking about like characters that people follow, right? I mean, because usually what happens
Hmm.
is you get in any kind of a novel series, you will get a core group of people that are introduced, and then you bring characters in and out based on that. So you have your core characters, and then you bring people in and you swap them out, and you're introducing new characters, reintroducing others because, they might be recurring or whatever. But the point is, from a series perspective, you have this core group of characters that goes through the entire thread of whatever
Hmm.
story arc. That's generally, even in Star Wars, that's kind of how the whole thing works. With the High Republic, though, you have multiple core groups. And that's what makes it different is that you might follow like this core group of characters and then the next novel comes out and it's like nobody. Like they might be referenced by name only. You're going to get people like of our Chris and stuff like that because she's sort of like the de facto head of the Jedi at that point. But she's not featured prominently in every one. I mean, they might mention her by name. Sometimes they don't even mention her at all. It's like a bunch of main characters, like completely different ones. And so, if they feature Yoda too prominently, I mean, I guess from a story perspective, because we are coming up on the Phantom Menace, because it is around the time that Yoda is going to somewhat maybe either tweak or reestablish or whatever the Jedi Order and the one that we're familiar with. Well, okay, maybe I can understand that.
Well, one, I think it all depends. It hinges upon a couple of things, and here are my concerns. One of the things is that like it depends on how far into season. I mean, where does season two take place? How far into the story?
Right.
When we come up upon season two, has it been a year? Has it been 10 minutes? Has it been 8 years? 10 years? We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one. So that of course moves the needle closer towards the Phantom Menace. But then, like once again, the story is about the Acolyte. And much like Vanessa Rowe, like, as we saw her, she didn't play such a prominent role in this season one. She was around. They definitely went to her for counsel or advice on how to move certain things. And I think that's how they should use Yoda.
That's a good
Use him as
point.
exactly for what he is and say, like, hey, look, you're the wise man. Hey, look, I'm questioning this. Should this be, I need some answers. Okay, thank you, Gandalf. Thank you, Dumbledore. Let me head out and
Right.
go do
Like
the
a
mission now.
kind of like a bridge to the
Yeah,
next story
the
line or
bridge, the
whatever.
parent,
Yeah.
the wise man, and
Mm-hmm.
and just let him be that. And but we don't need to see him necessarily fight and do all that because, like you said, it takes away from the story because now you putting Yoda in the front seat in the driver's seat, and that's kind of not where we need him to be in this point. Number one. But my biggest concern is you're going to screw him up. I mean, Disney has been screwing
Yeah.
up, and it's like you cannot f up Yoda. I'm sorry, I'm just have to put it as as censored as I can, but you cannot f up Yoda. I'm sorry, it's just that's an abomination. So it's just kind of like you have to be careful. And we've talked about this even when we were talking about the sequel trilogy, when we're talking about the original trilogy characters and bringing them back and things like that. Is you don't want to tarnish or ruin the legacy of what they've already built.
Mm.
And Disney, unfortunately, does not have a good track record of that. Now, fortunately, Han Solo was able to be Han Solo. And we don't have any problems with how they brought him back and used him. Harrison Ford did a phenomenal job. Carrie Fisher, while she was alive, for the most part, did a phenomenal job. They kind of played with her a little bit when they had her doing the whole Mary Poppins thing and, all that. But by and large, they treated her character properly because she was able to maintain it. Because and for the most part, she did exactly what she was supposed to do. Now, when it came to Luke, that's the one. Of course, you would think I almost would rather you screw up Leia than Luke in some ways, but like we all saw the what happened with Luke. They really didn't portray him the way that we thought he should have been portrayed. And that's once again a person of Mark Hamill who's been playing that character for years, who's intimately knowledgeable about that character. Even he couldn't even really change the direction of that. But now you got Yoda, who's an inanimate object. I mean, he's either CG or a puppet or something to that effect. So he doesn't have a voice, right? Except for Frank Oz, and Frank Oz is no longer doing that either. So you see what I'm saying? So it's kind of a thing where you have this very beloved character that you don't want to see tarnished by the ineptitude that Disney has been putting out with a lot of the different series. So that's
Yeah.
my biggest thing, is that if you show too much of him, you're going to eventually like have him say or do something that's like, oh, well, that completely contradicts everything he said in, Empire or whatever the case may be. And then now, well, wait a minute, why couldn't he do? We don't need that. So just keep him as, like, hey, let him dispense some wisdom. Let him kind of like, hey, look, I see you guys are in trouble. Let me kind of right side. Let's get the ship a little bit back on course here. What we need to do. I'm going to, hey, tighten this up, loosen up here. You might want to think about that a different way. Go off and do your mission, and that's kind of how I want to see them portray Yoda.
Yeah, maybe he'll be gay and he'll have a relationship with
Oh,
Saul.
God. Oh, my God. Well, he can't. Saul's dead.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Hey, first necrophilia
well,
Star Wars
really
thing.
Star Wars.
Nobody's really dead in Star Wars.
Dead in Star Wars.
Little relation between that Force ghost and, I don't know. I mean, they could sit on logs, right? I mean, but all kidding. Oh, actually, I wasn't even even going there. That's awesome.
Well, you kind of did with the whole necrophilia
Welcome
thing,
back to Head to Head, a Star Wars show here. But no, in all seriousness, this also brings up a good question: is that whether or not Frank Oz is going to be the voice?
Yeah.
Because by them putting Yoda in that last scene, obviously they're going to use him for season 2. Unless by some miracle there is no season 2, but look, as many complaints that the fans have lobbied against this show, it still is unfortunately the most watched Disney Plus. I don't know if it's just Star Wars show or show period. I don't remember, but I know it was really surprising to me. But I don't really see any kind of a scenario where there is no season 2. So I think we could talk about it as fact that it's going to happen. Usually we try not to do that. When we start speculating on the show, usually we try to make it so we say things and clarify whether something is a rumor, whether it's just speculation, whether it's, a confirmed thing. I mean, we're pretty careful about that stuff. We try not to be too clickbaity with what we do. But that said, and again, I think that we can safely say, look, I think that there's going to be a season 2 of this show. So I think we can move forward and talk about it as if it's going to happen. If it does, it really makes me wonder whether or not Frank Oz will voice the character. Now, they have had in the animated series, I forgot who it was that voiced it. I don't think it was Matthew Wood, but it was one of the people that have been doing it for a while. But again, this is live action, and to my knowledge, I think that Frank Oz is the only one who's done the voice of the live action Yoda.
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken. But here's the thing: it's like, one, you're portraying Yoda. I mean, one of two things. This is the High Republic era, the end of the High Republic era. So we're dealing with a younger Yoda. I don't know if he sounds any different than he does, even though he's probably like 800 years old or something around here or something like that, or maybe 750. I don't know if his voice changes much between then. Maybe at this point, it's just the way he talks all the time. As far as the sound, because we talked about how when James Earl Jones did Vader in Rogue One, he sounded like he was 80 years old. Well, Frank Oz is 80. So that's another thing too. It's like, okay, once again, hopefully they can secure Frank Oz, much like they did James Earl Jones, where they can get him saying a bunch of stuff and do the AI thing.
Well, they don't
So
even have
then
to get
that
him saying anything. I mean, because with James Earl Jones, they just went back through all the archive stuff, and AI was just able to duplicate it. You know, and
Yeah.
they could do that. That's true. AI could just analyze Frank Oz's Yoda performances and then just replicate it. That's a good point too.
Yeah. So I mean, they could do it that way, and and so he'll still get his film credit or whatnot
Well, and I think that would
because
be
it is his
acceptable.
voice.
I mean, yeah, and I don't
Um,
think that people would by and large have an issue with that. I mean, because again, I think that authenticity is probably the better thing. You know, I really honestly think that when you're dealing with something like Vader, because it's true, in Rogue One, which is supposed to happen before Episode 4, you know, he's
mhm.
sounding like a 9-year-old man, which, I mean, he was. So, I mean, it was great that James Earl Jones was still able to do the voice, but before AI, you were stuck with this whole choice of, man, do we get somebody else that just sort of replicates it and then it's not quite the same thing? Or do we get the guy who actually did the voice, but you could tell that that's an older voice and it takes you out of it a little bit? But AI changes that.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
that's a marvelous use, I think, of it, where when it's necessary, in this case, to go back to a younger version of the character, you can sample the younger version of that character. Let me get this
Yep.
chat in from, actually, a couple of chats from Voyager. She says, I've been reviewing the ratings. The viewership is terrible. Okay. It fell off the Nielsen charts 3 weeks in a row. It also fell off the Illuminate charts 3 weeks in a row. Goes on to say that Screen Rant and Collider have been putting out incorrect clickbait headlines saying it's dominating the charts, but it's simply not true. Even on Real Goods charts, it was 9th and 10th place. Okay, that tracks a little bit more, I think, with fan reaction. And that's
Definitely.
that's another thing too, you know, the media, a lot of people they fudge the numbers, right? I mean, if they want to give the certain impression, then they will alter things. I guess we have to pray they alter it no further, right? Because
Yes.
that's one of the things that I do think is a little bit dangerous, is the fact that Disney is trying so hard. Now, I have read some things that Bob Iger is really disheartened by the fact that, you know, everything is basically flopping. Like all these Disney projects are flopping, and it's like, well, that's because you're going for this agenda and you're trying to do all these things that, quite frankly, a majority of the fans don't want in order to pander to a small amount of fans that you think do want this. And even those people half the time don't want it.
Well, I mean, you have to ask yourself, right? I mean, just Bob Iger has to sit in his office and realize to the point that South Park made a whole movie about the Pandaverse, and it stars the head of your department. Like Kathleen Kennedy is like the focal point of it all.
And
like,
it's popular. That movie
it's
is like one of the
and
most.
people loved it.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you told me about it and I actually watched it, I was like,
Oh man,
I'm cheering throughout the thing like I was watching, the prison breaks in on Andor. I'm just like, yes, because, and that's what I'm saying. Like you, as the head of Disney, you have to, at some point, just address the fact that, like, look, we got to stop putting this crap out of here. I don't care about your feelings. I don't care about your little agenda. Make good content, period, or get out of here. Like, because
that's it. That's really what it comes down to.
Like, my neck is on the line here. I'm the head of Disney, and people are going to be looking at me like, well, you let it happen. And even though it's like, well, Kathleen, yeah, but you control. I mean, okay, you didn't like it. Why didn't you fire her?
Well, and that was the thing.
And
it was under and that's why I was really surprised by this whole thing, because it was really, man, I forgot the guy's name that took over from Iger initially, but he was the one that sort of put a lot of this stuff in place. When Iger got his job back, I mistakenly thought, okay, cool, Bob Iger's back. He's going to right the ship. Things are going to be fine. Come to find out that Iger was actually probably a bigger supporter of the whole thing than the previous guy was. So it was like, oh, we're going more in the direction. Okay, this is not encouraging at all. But yes, I think that you're absolutely correct. And this is both on the Marvel side and the Lucasfilm side. You just have to start making good stories. When it comes to the whole Star Wars thing, though, I think one of the biggest issues that they have, besides the whole, woke agenda thing, the other side of this whole thing is just they're trying to make money. We always said that it's like they're trying to get that money back and they're trying to make these blockbuster Star Wars films. And it's like the whole reason why they were blockbuster films is because they spoke to everybody. Just make good, timeless stories. You'll bring them all back.
Mm-hmm.
And even the Acolyte. Yeah. Even the Acolyte, I mean, it has some good characters in it. It had some good story elements in it. Like, when we're talking about a season 2, I mean, look, you and I both liked, I don't know, I would say like maybe half to maybe a third of the episodes of season 1.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they could easily salvage this thing. They could come out with season 2 and it could be, they could right the ship, so to speak, and it could be an amazing season 2. They just have to, not do what they did before.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's what I'm saying. Like, quite frankly, and this is where it comes. This is where the direction and the leadership, right? I get, and I think it's Lee Jung. I can't think of his name, but the guy who plays Soul.
Squid Game guy.
Squid Game, right?
Squid Game, yeah, as David would say.
I love the fact that I get the, or I won't say I love. I get the fact that you want to grasp the Asian culture and you want to pull them into the Star Wars universe. What's stupid is you bring in. I get that. Yes, he did well with Squid Game, but it was in his own language. Why would you bring someone to act in something where he's going to be struggling through the English language? And not only the English language, now he's got to say all this, jargon from Star Wars. That's, it's,
that's what I'm saying. You got to give it to that guy, man. I mean, not only
kudos to him for tackling and really and going after it. I mean, and this is no criticism on him. My criticism is on the decision to find you another Asian actor who can actually speak the English dialect a little bit better.
I'm just imagine the casting call. Here, you go see this room full of Asians. You're like, hey, can any of you speak English? Just saying.
Let me just hear you read this copy.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
I mean, as I'm saying, and that's what I'm saying. Because we talked about it, the guy who plays Chosen on Cobra Kai. Once again, this is our Cobra Kai reference. Once again, he does really well with the English language. He's about almost as old as Saul, if not maybe a little bit older. Okay, sure. But hey, he dies in still good shape and he can do it. I'm not saying that you had to necessarily get him, because I understand they were shooting Cobra Kai probably while they were shooting, Acolyte as well. However, what I'm saying is that you can find an actor like him that can actually do it.
Here's an example. When they got Donnie Yen to play Chirrut, yeah.
Chirrut Imwe.
I knew it was something. Yeah. But when they got Donnie Yen to do it, it's like, okay, now here's a guy that, yes, he's a big star overseas, and that's mainly what he does. But he has a grasp. He's fully bilingual, though. That's the thing. That's the difference. It's like, even I get the idea that you want, a big star, but the thing is that, and yeah, Squid Game really took the world by storm and all that, but the problem is, like you pointed out, I mean, not only do you actually have to say these lines in English and emote them and make it believable, but now you have all this jargon, right? You gotta go through all this.
You gotta say hyperspace.
Yeah, like all this space stuff, like stuff that even Harrison Ford was looking at it going, I don't even know what any of this is. Like, I don't even know what to say on this.
Well, he even said it. He was like, you can write this crap, but you can't say it.
Mm-hmm.
He even told that to George Lucas, and Harrison Ford is an Academy Award winning, actor.
Well,
So
now
it's
he
just kind
is.
of like,
What makes
well,
it
now he
funny
is, not at
about
the
that
time.
is at the time he wasn't. He had only done
Right.
American Graffiti. It was like he was the carpenter on, that was just running around, and they said, hey, do you want to come in and do this test? And he does, and he gets the part. So it's basically like, okay, the carpenter just basically told us that this is crap. I mean, he wasn't Harrison Ford yet. Let me get to, because David basically says, I agree with Daryl that the casting was awful. There's no chemistry among the characters. OSHA didn't even have chemistry with herself. Well, yeah, look, I mean, this is a good point, right? Is the fact that there was a lack of chemistry between, now, not always, but for the most part, yes. It was just like a bunch of people were brought together to say lines. And then let me get this one in from Voyager. Says, have you been reading the interviews of Leslye? What are your thoughts on her explaining her work after the fact? It's like a test in school. Show your work. I mean, look.
Yeah, I mean, I've
You,
caught a couple of them,
mm-hmm.
and like this is where this whole Yoda thing comes
Yeah,
from, right? This is
right.
And she even said, like, okay, I knew I wanted to bring him in, but I wasn't ready for him, so that's why I didn't give him a full scene or anything like that. And Acolyte, which I'm happy to hear her that she recognizes that. But my thing is, like, as I said on the onset of the show, I just don't want her to screw up the character. Don't have him do stuff or say things that are just like completely out of. And I mean, and I get it. There might, if they try it, they're going to say like, "Oh, well, this is before he had the revelation." Remember, this is 75 years before Phantom Menace. He got wiser even more since then.
It's like,
They'll
look,
probably use that
Yoda,
to try to cover it up.
Exactly. He
But
stopped doing cocaine a long time
Right.
before the Phantom Menace. This is pre-Phantom
Got
Menace,
clean.
Yoda. Right, exactly. Went to rehab.
Yeah.
But that's a
Right.
good point, though.
Right, like back then, he wasn't talking backwards. He talked normal. What happened?
I was thinking about that.
they'll do something stupid like that. You're just like, really?
Oh, he had an injury, right? And it's
Right.
But actually, I have been watching or reading a lot of the interviews as well. And I mean, I could say that in a lot of ways it's funny because, you think back, it's almost like when Behind the Music was on and there was an artist that, you didn't really care too much about or, you kind of forgot about or whatever. Some reason, I don't know why. And it wasn't just me. This had the same effect on a lot of people. Is that you watch the Behind the Music, you see, okay, this is what the artist was going for. This is what they were trying to do, all this other stuff. Not only do you have this just uncontrollable urge to go out and get all their albums, but then when you listen to them, it's almost like you hear them differently because now you understand the artist's intent.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
I had to admit that a little bit of that rubbed off on me when I was reading some of her interviews. I was kind of like, well, okay. Again, there's still a lot of, poor execution and bad decisions and all that stuff. But some of the stuff, not all of it, some of the stuff, you can go back and go, oh, I understand what you were going for. But the criticism I think you and I both had, even at the time we were reviewing this, because you and I both somewhat understood what it was she was trying to do, even before we read confirmation in a lot of these interviews. And a lot of it, quite frankly, it's like, okay, I get that. But, and again, she's not the one that directed or any of this other stuff. But whether it's her writing or whether it's the directors and the people that she hired or whatever to execute this thing, it's like that should have come out in the episodes. Like, we shouldn't have to listen to your explanations on why you wrote things a certain way and then you kind of go, oh, yeah, okay, that makes sense. No. That should have come out in the production.
Yeah, exactly. I could see if you had like one scene or something that people might have been mystified, like, oh, okay, I was trying to where you were going with that. But the whole series, no, thank you. Like, I shouldn't have to do that for a whole complete freaking series. That's stupid.
Not only is it stupid, well, the other part of it too is that not only is that part really stupid, but you also have a situation where you have all these issues with characters, right? I mean, one of the things that a lot of YouTubers brought up And she never explained this in any of her interviews when she was doing the apologetics tour, I like to call it. Um, basically, you really didn't know who the main character of this show was supposed to be. Like, I don't know who I'm supposed to follow. I don't know who I'm supposed to care about. The motivations of a lot of your main characters are changing on a dime, and it doesn't make sense. And any investment that I did have in certain characters disappeared because I'm constantly being taken out of the show because of all this stupid stuff.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly, and that's the thing. It's you're. I don't know if she's trying to do too much, and we've talked about that too. And I always caution people: it's like I understand that you want to bring something new and something fresh to a particular franchise. And I was just talking with David, not yesterday actually, and we were talking about X-Men. We were talking about the original 1990s. I want to say like what 92, 93. The animation, the cartoon that came out. Once again, that was a really good show. But then they brought back X-Men 97 recently this year, and like, man, did they really like hit it on the dime, man. I mean, it was really, really good. The characters were well thought out. The stories, they fleshed out some things. They kind of changed some of the animation a little bit. They upgraded some things, but everything still had a sense of like you still felt the X-Men 97, even when the intro music, like they remixed it a little bit, they gave it a little bit more contemporary, but it still gave you those chills. Like when you hear it come on, you're like, yes, this is X-Men. Like I'm ready. And then they, of course, when you get the characters, they're delivered, and then they expounded upon characters that we already know. We saw a lot from Gambit. We saw a lot from all these different characters. And so when we're talking about Star Wars, it's like that's the same thing. Stop trying. Like I keep using this analogy. Stop trying to get the touchdown and get the first down. Just incrementally bring these characters up and show different things versus trying to move this big massive world at once, and then you wonder why you're overwhelmed and it's failing. It's because you're trying to eat the elephant in one bite instead of taking small chunks. And that's just the biggest thing I've seen when it comes to these stories. In case in point, when you have characters you don't know who to root for or who I'm supposed to follow, the motives are changing, left and right. It just because you're trying to fit everything in. And that's what it feels like. It feels rushed. No different than how we felt about Rise of Skywalker. Everything's moving at a breakneck pace. Where okay, there's no time to have tension, and then a release. It's just, oh, we here, we got that. Okay, on to the next thing, on to the next, because you're trying to cram everything and wrap up this whole saga in 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
It just failed.
Yeah, well, an interesting side note, since you're bringing up the X-Men, I was reading an interview with Hugh Jackman, because, he was talking about the new Deadpool Wolverine movie. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously
Have you seen it?
No, not yet.
Okay. Me
Yeah,
either.
I haven't had time.
I gotta try. Me either.
There's so many
Same here.
movies, man. There's like Twisters I
I know.
want to see.
Yep.
That movie Trap. I mean, there's just like this endless amount of movies that I am so behind on. And I mean, that's the funny thing is that I actually subscribe to that stupid, like, you could see 3 movies a week at AMC for like $20 a month or something. I mean, I still can't get out to see them. But even though I can't see the movies, I can read about them.
Right.
And so one of the notable things, of course, about this X-Men movie is he's actually wearing the yellow classic suit.
Mm-hmm.
And somebody finally had the presence of mind to say, hey, what was behind the decision to finally wear the yellow suit? Because that was one of the things I was really excited about. Because remember, with Logan, that was Hugh Jackman saying goodbye to the role. He was, he was like, okay, I'm done playing Wolverine, or whatever. Well, when they got him back to do it, because the thing that was so depressing was like, oh man, we never got to see him wearing the classic, yellow comic suit, right? So they bring him back. He wears the suit. Somebody finally had the presence of mind to ask him, hey, what was behind that? And this is just so horrible. This is why you just want to smack filmmakers in the head. He said, actually, they were going to make the original X-Men movie with all the classic comic outfits. But The Matrix had come out, and the filmmakers decided that they wanted to go in like this whole darker direction and make everything kind of muted and all this other stuff. So now you can all think back to all these X-Men movies, all the standalone Wolverine movies, all this stuff. We could have had an actual, real, like, classic costume thing the whole time. But because of one stupid decision, we were robbed of that.
Wow.
And that was something,
crazy.
I know. That's just something that where I was just kind of like, oh man, now I'm getting angry about it, right? And it just goes to show you that that's what they're kind of doing with Star Wars right now. They're making all these boneheaded decisions that's actually going to ruin the franchise essentially forever. Already kind of has, honestly. So that was a little side note that I, was a little bit painful. Now, of course, you were bringing up that you and David were talking about the X-Men yesterday, but David brings up, of course, his other favorite franchise is Fast and the Furious. He said the original Fast and Furious had way better chemistry. Right, guys? That's the one you both like, so you can't be haters, and you're right. Look, I'll even go further than that. Even the really stupid ones had great chemistry. That's the whole thing carrying the movie. It certainly isn't the plot.
Definitely.
I mean, it's a little over the top and everything else. That just goes into what we're saying, right? You can, if you're going to have a weak plot and a bunch of different issues, if everybody in the film has great chemistry, it'll overcome a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Voyager has a couple of questions here that could probably spear the next part of this discussion. She says, what would be Yoda's storyline even, or what would it even be in season 2? An arbitrator between Vern and Kamir? Because it's true. Vernestra, Kamir, they're sort of like, I guess, the Vader Luke or something like that in a sense. I mean, I'm kind of reaching, but
more like Obi-Wan and Vader.
There you go. That would be better. Yep. Yeah. Okay, that's better. Retrieving May's memories, diplomacy with the Senate. I mean, these are good questions because obviously she was going, okay, I got to bring out the big guns because now we got some big problems. And so she's going to Yoda for advice. But that's a good point, though. And it goes into what you were saying toward the beginning of the episode, right? It's like, well, is he just going to be somebody that guides them and then they go and execute the plan? Is he going to be front and center? I don't know.
I think. Well, I think that was Voyager who brought that up.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great. All the things that you mentioned were phenomenal in my opinion, because I think he's got to tackle all of them, and I think that's why you need someone of, excuse me, Yoda's magnitude in order to deal with the severity of the situation. Because, and I kind of forgot about, but yeah, there is a bit of distrust once again in the Senate, because now they're looking like, okay, well, they kind of try to cover up Saul's little thing, but it's just like, okay, that makes the Senate a little uncomfortable because they're like, okay, wait, they thought it was only one Jedi that died. Now you're telling me there's multiple, and then on top of this, like this guy's running around on his own free court on a court. Why don't you guys have a handle on your people? And it's spiraling out of control. And you need someone who has the diplomacy, which we know Yoda does, someone who has the power and the presence to really say, hey, we got this. Let me deal with it. And he has that type of wisdom. So I think that Yoda is going to have to deal with a lot of different things as far as, OSHA's memory, is going to have to deal with the Senate. I think it's going to have to deal with Vernestra and Kamir, because she needs to understand, like, okay, well, I lost, a Padawan essentially. How do I deal with this? Do I still have an attachment to him, we're still connected in our own way, but now we're on opposite sides of the track, and now he's going after this whole Sith thing. You know, Master Yoda, more about the Sith than any of us. So, what do we do? How do we combat this? And so I think that's the job of Yoda. And I think that's why I said he's gonna have to be more so the Dumbledore of this, in the sense of like, hey, being able to keep the peace in the Senate, being able to keep people focused on the actual objective, and then still kind of see into the future as far as like, okay, what's coming down the pike, because you got, like I said, you still got Plagueis out here doing his thing. We don't know. I mean, at some point, we know Palpatine's got to come into the picture. So there's a lot that he's going to have to contend with, and he has to figure out. And then we might even see some people start getting appointed to the council, like Kiadi Mundi. We already saw him in season 1. Maybe we start seeing the council that we began to come into contact when we got to Phantom Menace.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go, actually, is the fact that we're only, I don't know. I don't even know how many years, because by the time the Phantom Menace hits, obviously that council has been together for a while. Things have been running in that fashion for a while. So at some point, we have to start to now see not only the transition between what we're familiar with in the High Republic and then what we would consider the more modern era of the Jedi, but we also had to see how that happens and what's the catalyst for it. Obviously, I think that what Headland's going for is, okay, what we saw in season 1 is essentially the catalyst for the changes that Yoda's going to make, but somehow he has to ascend as like the head of the council. And we have to see, and again, we don't really know how many seasons this show is supposed to go. We don't know how many seasons it will actually go. Is this going to be kind of like, sort of like, since you made the Cobra Kai reference, I'll join in. From the very beginning of Cobra Kai, the creator said, look, we have the beginning, middle, and end. We have the entire story. We just don't know how many seasons they're going to give us to tell it. And we hope, at the time, it was YouTube Red, which of course turned into YouTube Premium. And then the show jumped to Netflix in season 3. And of course, they're in the middle of what is now the last season, right? So they basically always had the story. It was just, they had said at the time, okay, if Netflix had said like season 4 is your last season, they could have still completely told that story. They just would have had to condense a lot of things. Because they had all 6 seasons, they were able to make the choice on when they wanted to end it, and they knew, okay, this is the sweet spot. We need 6 seasons to tell this story. Is Leslye Headland going to say, hey, I need 3 or 4 seasons to tell this particular story? Okay, you're only going to get 2, or maybe you'll get 3, or whatever it is. The point is that hopefully, what I'm really hoping happens here is that somebody says, okay, this is a story. I really hope the whole thing's been fleshed out. Sounds like it has, just from the interviews that she's given. And I hope that there's a balance in how this story is told throughout each season, so it doesn't either feel rushed or unnecessarily dragged out, right? So we have to see where this transition. And here's another thing that a lot of people haven't factored in either. Lucasfilm might not want her to be the one in this show to definitively tell how it goes completely from the High Republic to the Phantom Menace. They might say, hey, listen, your cutoff is like 10 years before or something. It's like they might not want to pull the trigger on that revelation just yet.
Do you think that they could actually, what they would possibly do? So, since if they have the story already fleshed out, right? Presumably.
Yeah.
What if they had somebody else? I know, right? What if they had somebody else like, okay, they don't like the direction that Leslie's taking it, but maybe they bring somebody else to do it whose direction they do like, even though it's kind of her story, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, they could do that. Um, I mean, I hate to say it, but ultimately, in case of emergency, you got the world between worlds. You can always say, well, that's not what really happened. That was just like another world between worlds alternate universe. This is what really happened, you
Well,
know?
no, what I'm saying is like what I'm saying, like they have the story of the Acolyte, and they have, let's say,
Right.
it's supposed to go 4 seasons. But let's just say, like, you know what, Leslie, eh, you're not the person we thought you
Yeah,
were gonna
like
be.
after
We're
season
gonna
2,
put
they're kind of like, you know what? Let's
we're
get
gonna
somebody
put
else
Colin Trevorrow
yeah, to
to
finish up
do it
seasons 3 and
to
4.
finish the 4, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean,
that's what I mean.
I don't know because it would really depend on the kind of deal that they made with her specifically because sometimes she's the one that came up with this concept. How much of the
Mhm.
concept can she own? Because if you think about it, you brought up Colin Trevorrow. They
Mhm.
could have just done the Duel of the Fates movie and had J.J. Abrams do it. But because Trevorrow wrote it and it was kind of his thing, they had to abandon it. So you can't
Mhm.
really say that, Lucasfilm just owns it outright and there's no, issues. I'm sure that the directors, writers, whatever, have some, I don't know, control or
Clause,
whatever. Yeah, or
yeah,
something that they can
in that
say,
contract
yeah, that you can use this or not, or that I'm attached to this project, and if it doesn't go forward, then the project
with
can't be
me, then
completed. Yes,
right.
exactly. Voyager says,
Gotcha.
what if they did a young Palpatine? They cast a young, good-looking, up-and-coming actor. Hunger Games did this recently with the President Snow prequel with Tom Blythe, and it was a hit.
Yeah,
Look,
I mean, I
we
think
did a
that's what
whole
we're gonna
show on
get.
that.
Yeah, we actually did. We actually did come up with like some people, and it just depends on what age you decide to get him starting with Plagueis. Like in this situation, if you're getting him from like a teenager or like a maybe like an earlier, like maybe 21, 22, like somewhere around there, then you definitely need to go younger. But didn't we have like Michael Fassbender or somebody?
We had
Not Michael
Michael
Fassbender.
Fassbender. We had
Oh
Tom
yeah, who was
Hiddleston.
it?
Tom Hiddleston
Tom
was like our
Hiddleston,
our
the
favorite
front
because
runner.
he just
Yeah, man.
he's kind of like a dead ringer for Ian McDiarmid in a lot of ways. Like he has the range to pull it off. That's because
Yeah,
the problem is you can't just get any up and coming actor. They have to have the range to pull it off.
true.
Palpatine's a very complex character. And
Mhm.
McDermott actually set the bar for how that character is to be played. And, he, of course, knocked it out of the park, too. So the combination,
Yeah.
you would just have to get the right person. And I would hope, look, we know that's where this is going. I mean, that's the whole point of the
Yeah.
Acolyte. You're showing the flip side. You're showing, well, in theory anyway, it wasn't exactly what we were promised, but we are still getting glimpses of the Sith. We're understanding how that side functions a little bit. Um, I don't know. So I think they are going to feature a young Palpatine, or if they don't, we might get glimpses of it because, like you said too, they got to bring Plagueis into it more. And again, it really depends on how many seasons they go with this thing. If they
Yeah.
go 4, 5, 6 seasons, then yeah, then you can start to play with that. If like you're only going 3, well, then you really have to talk about the rise of Plagueis and then bookmark it there. Well, here's a good question from Voyager. Are you team CGI Yoda or puppet Yoda?
Ooh. Well, okay. I'll answer it this way. You might agree with me on this one, Eric. I
It's
think
always a
it all
chance.
depends. I think it all depends on how you're utilizing Yoda. If you're having him just be the voice of reason, and then I would say puppet. If you have him moving around and doing a whole bunch of action things that he needs to get involved, then you're gonna need to go CG.
Yeah, and that's basically exactly what my answer is too. I mean, I always prefer the
Yes.
puppet,
Yes,
but
I prefer the puppet. Like, yeah.
but it really depends on what you're trying to have them do.
Hmm.
I mean, sure, you can go the puppet if all you're doing is having him in a room and he's just counseling people or whatever the case may be. But if he's going to get into some sort of lightsaber duel or something, and look, Attack of the Clones set the bar, and so did Revenge of the Sith in a major way. I mean, we've seen, and that takes place afterwards. I mean, this is before. This is kind of at the end of the zenith of where Yoda was, right? So, you can't cheese out. So, yeah, true. I definitely think that you have to do something, or maybe it's a combination of the two. Maybe certain scenes you can do it with just the puppet, and then other scenes where it requires action. Although it depends, though, because then you might be messing with two different looks. And look, I don't know if I even trust these people with this anyway, because look at the bad makeup job and everything that where's 180 million going?
Exactly. Now, see, to me, at this point, I would say, because I would hate to see Yoda wielding a lightsaber in this era because they're so freaking huge. Like, I mean, you got basically like this huge pipe that's hanging from your side as a lightsaber, whereas, of course, they refine them to make them a little bit more manageable. So for me, I think what would be more impressive is don't show Yoda with the lightsaber, because I think that kind of robs, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith a little bit. But I would just show like, okay, this is where you show Yoda's Force abilities, though. This is where you could really showcase how powerful Yoda really is, because he's younger. And this is that, like you said, they're closer to the zenith of their power. This is where you make Yoda like, this is why he's the Grandmaster. This is why everyone bows to Yoda, because he can't be touched when you see him in his Force element.
Yeah, I would agree. Like if this was taking place during the early to mid years of the High Republic, then I would think a lightsaber duel would be a little bit more appropriate. Because obviously he's dueled with lightsabers. I mean, otherwise he wouldn't have felt the need to do it in the prequel trilogy. If it was one of those, okay, he's so powerful or whatever. So he's obviously,
but that's also one of the things too. Like, once again, the story more or less dictated, because it's like, because quite frankly, there's nothing that, even in the Attack of the Clones and really in Revenge of the Sith, there's nothing that he couldn't necessarily do with the Force. What made the lightsaber duel what it was who he was fighting. He's fighting his former Padawan, and then he's fighting the most powerful Sith Lord.
So you're talking about the emotional connection.
The emotional, like, it's more of a reason, like, okay, you know what? It's kind of like, all right, if I'm going to go fight my dad or something like that, like, okay, it's a bit of a more like a thing. Because now it's a test of ability. Like, okay, Dad, you thought, you taught me this, but I'm better than you now, and I'm going to show you. So it's like, okay, bring what you got. It's one of those type of things. And so I think that's what made the Dooku and Yoda battle so good, because it's like, it's that son thinking that I can spank dad, and it's like, not at all. Then there's the Palpatine situation, where it's like, okay, now I'm meeting my equal. But at that time, during the High Republic, there weren't anybody as equal to Yoda, because there weren't any Sith around. So it was almost kind of like, what would be the point of him really dueling with anybody with a lightsaber?
Yeah, well, but I mean, they
Aside
were
from
using
teaching.
Well, there's that, and then there were people that came up. I mean, there were enemies that did require lightsabers. I mean, yeah, I get it. It's almost like you would have to go like further back or something before the Sith were defeated. And if Yoda, because he's, like you said, he's still like 800 years old or something at this point.
Right.
Or late 700s. So I mean, he's been around for a while. So yeah, maybe when he was like 200 or something, he was actually fighting Sith Lords or, something like that. I mean, the High Republic does have its share of enemies that are very formidable, but it's true. I mean, you could wipe them out pretty much with the Force too, though.
Yeah.
If you're
Especially
Yoda.
somebody like him.
Yeah.
Especially if, like I said,
you're Yoda.
somebody like Saul, Vanessa, give them the lightsaber. It makes more sense for them. But for somebody as powerful as Yoda, it's almost kind of like I don't really need to.
But again, I mean, you're at the mercy of storytelling too, because it's no different than one of the things that drove me insane about the end of the Acolyte, where Saul is like trying to hold the bridge, and he has to sacrifice May to save Osha. It's like, dude, you could have just grabbed the two girls. The two girls would have been lighter than the bridge. He could have saved them both. But see, the storyline that they wanted to tell. So it's almost like you have to defy common sense or defy the limits of their powers in order to tell a story that you want to tell. That's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
And the same thing with Palpatine and Yoda. They didn't need a lightsaber duel. They were both insanely powerful in the Force. What's that going to do? You know what it's going to do? It's going to put butts in the movie theater seats because you're like, hey, we get to see like a lightsaber duel between these two titans of the Force. But there is no story reason for that, though.
Well, I would say that because you don't know where their abilities lie. Like, because somebody might be powerful in the Force, but they're not great swordsmen.
Yeah.
So it's like I may be able to win on one front, but not on the other.
True, but you're talking about Palpatine and Yoda. You don't get where those guys are in the Force. They're like without tons of experience. Because that's one of the actual things that if you think about it, they start with lightsabers and that becomes more their main weapon. And then as you get more powerful in the Force, you start to get away from that a little bit. I mean, even Luke, who really wasn't, didn't have the whole same formal training, right? He was homeschooled.
He learned, online.
Yeah, he kind of went to the online course. Exactly. He went to that Phoenix, university Jedi course. It's like, look, man, here's a couple of books,
What's your major, Jedi?
Maybe you tested out of a few things, but even him, he was still the same, because it doesn't matter how you learn the Force, whether you're a Jedi or a Sith or something in between. It's like, first, you get somewhat powerful with the Force, but it's like the lightsaber thing. That becomes like your main weapon of offense and defense. And then as you get more powerful, that's when you just kind of put it away. Now, I guess you could make the argument of, hey, let's see which one of us is more rusty with this thing. But,
that's what I'm saying.
But the idea is the Force controls. It's almost like when you get that powerful, swordsmanship doesn't even matter because the Force is almost like controlling or obeying your actions so much that, it's not even real swordsmanship at that point. But again, it looks pretty. That's the reason why they do that. And that's exactly. So that's one of the things that we've always had an issue. Why, like we always go back to this, why didn't Qui-Gon or Obi-Wan sense the fish in The Phantom Menace? It's because they needed to move the story along. They needed an exciting chase scene. Why didn't... I mean, we saw it in those... I always forget the guy that actually created those initial Clone Wars animated shorts that were like 9 minutes or something.
Yeah.
And, in that one, you had, like, Yoda just, like, waving his hand and, like, legions of stormtroopers just, like, blow out of the way or something like that. It's like, yeah, because if you really think about how much power these guys have, it's almost a Superman problem at that point. I mean, there's just no... What are you going to... You have to create something like the Yuuzhan Vong in order to even give them anybody formidable. So they have to sometimes basically temper the power in order to further the story.
True.
All right, let's see. We got Voyager that says, what if they did a Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon style dialogue, philosophical conversation between Yoda and Senator Rayencourt? Yoda defends the Jedi against the Senator's anti-Jedi mentality. Well, there's a lot of There's a ton, both in the expanded universe when you had oh man, what was that guy's name? Began with an S. Like his last name began with an S. But he was basically the main. He was like kind of the main adversary for Leia in the expanded universe, and he was totally against the Jedi. Right? He was always the guy that's like, "Oh, it's the Jedi's fault. You know, we're trusting them too much. We're trying to move ourselves away." In fact, he was such an influential character that they created a new canon version of him. They changed the name, but he was in Bloodline. I mean, he was basically like the same type of character. He's popped up in a couple of novels, but they've always dealt with that. You know, they've always dealt with the New Republic's Senate being once again a little bit skeptical of giving the Jedi too much latitude. Because obviously, you know, you can understand from their perspective, kind of like the Batman Superman thing, right? It's like, okay, well, what happens if they go off the rails?
Mm-hmm.
You know, then what are we going to do? And the other thing is, if we become too reliant on them, then we become weak and lazy. So, I mean, you could do that. You could actually have, and look, you and I have both said, well, let's just turn Bloodline into a movie. There you go. Right there. There's a movie. Of course, you got to do it right.
Absolutely.
That's the other thing. I mean, just because you have good source material does not mean that you're automatically going to make a fantastic movie. You could still screw it up. That is possible. But, you know, look, the bottom line is there's a lot of fantastic ideas for stories in the expanded universe, even in the new canon. It is nice that some of these creators are now actually going into that source material now and deriving stuff. They're just not doing it right.
Yeah, I mean, I think like we always talked about, there's tons of books and things out here that would really make really good shows. We talked about Lords of the Sith.
Another
What's her
great
last?
one.
Like you said, Bloodline. Claudia, is it Claudia Gray?
Yeah, she, you know, like Lost
But
Stars.
Lost Stars,
That'd be
Aftermath
interesting.
trilogy.
Mm.
You know, there's just so many different things that, you know, there's so many different books that are really good. Even like I said, in the new canon, that are not even just so much the Timothy Zahn stuff, but
And Timothy Zahn
I
wrote
think
stuff in the new canon too. That's the other thing.
that's true. That is true. So I mean, I think, you know, if you just they kind of piggyback, well, not piggyback, but they kind of cherry pick a lot of things from these different novels and kind of bring them in. So I think that's cool. But some of these the actual stories themselves, I think they would just make terrific, especially if you not do a film, a great series.
Or even do something like incorporate this stuff into something like The Acolyte. You know, you could do that. I mean, you don't necessarily have to make an adaptation of a particular book, let's just say. You can actually take the themes, some of the scenes or whatever, the book, and put them into a different project. There's some things that would work in The Acolyte that way. But, you know, it just depends on what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as always.
So what's the verdict? What's the Yoda or no Yoda?
Well, I definitely think
he's gonna be in there. I can't say Yoda or no Yoda.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I mean, he's gonna be in there
because he's gonna be in there regardless. But are we still standing on the fact that we just hope we want him to be more of the instructor, the wise man, the kind of the figurehead, as opposed to having a prominent role? We can't agree to that, right?
You know, like your Dumbledore Gandalf kind of thing. Yeah,
Gandalf,
I would definitely say that is our consensus. The rest of the world, whether the people that are chatting live right now, watching live, watching after the fact, of course, all you guys can, you know, jump in on this. But the other thing that I think is actually important to point out is right now, I think it's gone from people basically being excited about, ooh, can't wait to see the new, season of The Acolyte. No. Basically, what we're doing now is we're like, ooh, I hope they don't screw up Yoda.
Right.
I mean, it's funny how like all these things change all the time. Where it's just like, ooh, I hope that this one doesn't suck too bad. I mean,
Yeah. It's like, what's the level? What level of trash is this going to be?
Exactly. Unfortunately, the bar is being lowered and lowered as we speak.
Yes.
Dragonfly says Yoda shows up in Young Jedi Adventures quite a bit to drop wisdom. That's true.
And that makes sense because he did go on that sabbatical to teach. So,
well, and I mean the Young Jedi Adventures, they've had that for a long time, and it is a good point that any of the books and stuff, I think they even did I don't know if they did an animated series on that or not. I don't think so. They may have though. I've lost track on some of that stuff, but I know that the book series, it's kind of like a young teen thing. He always is popping up, and that's basically the role that I think pretty much everybody universally hopes that he's going to have. I don't necessarily think he's going to be like a front and center character. He's going to be more of a transitional character, probably. Like, okay, you're done with this part. Here's your next challenge or whatever. It's kind of like in The Biggest Loser. He's the Allison Sweeney of, she pops up to give the contestants like their next challenge or whatever, and then the trainers and everybody go and deal with them. I think that's what Yoda has to do.
Your final rank is
exactly right. All right. Well,
yeah.
As usual, don't forget to hit that like button. Of course, hit the subscribe button, and then hit that notification bell if you guys want to see, obviously, when we're going to be live, which is admittedly a little bit more challenging these days than it usually is. Again, we do strive to be on live at 8 o'clock on both Sunday and Monday. We're here. So, not really sure what we're going to talk about next Sunday or Monday, really, because it's weird. It's like Star Wars has gotten a little bit quiet. Have you noticed that?
Well, yeah, and understandably so. But there's one topic I saw that we might bring up, and it's basically why do a lot of the Jedi decide to turn dark? So that might be something.
Oh, that might be fun. We should plan on that. All right, that's what our next show is going to be about. Why did the Jedi decide to the ones that did turn dark, why'd they turn dark? So That'll be it. All right, so check us out next week. Again, if our schedule does change or whatever, just keep watching, kind of like what you did for today. Just, we'll be on eventually. Unfortunately. Hey, look, part of the reason why we haven't been on too is I've actually started the process of putting our new studio together, well, such as it is. It's maybe it's a little bit of a stretch calling it a studio, but our new space, that's what we're going to call it. Yeah, that's what we're calling it. Where we'll actually be together live again, both of us. So
yes, we could. Same room.
Yep, same room. It'd be a little bit of a reduction in the boxes. It'll be more like the two chairs and little table set up, and we'll have a nice monitor behind us and everything. So it'll be a little bit less like COVID era, and a little bit more like the modern thing. So we're really looking forward to doing that as soon as we can. But of course, that's part of what's taking up a lot of time and why our shows are a little crazy. And of course, there's a lot of things that are coming up for both of us that might necessitate us not being able to be on. But again, we're always going to be there for you guys. We're always going to talk Star Wars with you guys. And we definitely want you chatting in. And besides hitting the like button, subscribing, and all that, we want you guys to comment. We have our Discord, and this is something that I don't often really promote that much, but on the Discord is a Call of Duty channel that's in there that I am in quite a bit anytime I'm playing. Probably going to add there after this, actually. Maybe. We'll see. But, you guys can always check that out. And, of course, there's a lot of discussion that goes on our Discord channel, so be sure to check that out. So, till next week, guys, I think that's going to do it for us. So, I'm Eric Vansel.
I'm Daryl Sanders.
May the Force be with you.
Always.
Head to Head, a Star Wars podcast. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at HeadToHeadSW. Submit your questions for our next show. Visit our official website at headtoheadswpodcast.com. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.